Welcome to section 7-3 cell boundaries. In this particular section, we're going to learn about the function of the cell and how things move into and out of a cell. The most important parts of a cell are its borders, which separate the cell from its surroundings. The cell membrane is a thin, flexible barrier that surrounds all cells. One thing that you have to remember here, or the key thing, is that all cells have a cell membrane. The cell wall is a strong supporting layer around the cell membrane found only in plant cells. Also, bacteria. So, plant cells and bacteria cells have a cell wall. The cell membrane regulates what enters and leaves the cell and also gives it protection and support. So, these are some functions of the cell membrane. As you can see by looking at the picture, which is something that you're going to be coloring, there are two layers to the cell membrane. There's this outer layer, and then there is an inner layer. Okay, so it's a bi-layer. Bi standing for two. A lipid bilayer is a double-layered sheet which composes nearly all cell membranes. Protein molecules are embedded in the lipid bilayer. So here's a protein, here's a protein, here's a protein, and so on. Carbohydrate molecules resemble tails, and those sometimes can be attached to a protein molecule. The outer part of the cell membrane is the water-loving part. One thing that's key about this, it is polar, and we know that water is a polar molecule. Hydro stands for water. Philic stands for loving. So the outer portion is hydrophilic. And if you looked at your previous pictures, these appear to be round circles, and we call those heads. Okay. So these are both heads, and these are on the outside, the outer portion of the membrane. The inside part between the two membranes is called water fearing. These are nonpolar. They're hydrophobic. Phobia means to fear. And these are fatty acids. Remember, a fatty acid is a lipid. Tails. And these go out like this. So the outer portion is water loving, the inner portion is water fearing. And this is going to play a role in how things move back and forth throughout the cell. The cell wall, on the other hand, is present in plants, algae, fungi, and many prokaryotes. Prokaryotes, remember, are bacteria. These lie outside the cell membrane and are porous. Porous means they have little holes and they allow things to move in and out. So they allow water, oxygen, carbon dioxide, and other substances to pass in and out of the cell. The main function of the cell wall is to provide support and protect the cell. Plant cells are mostly made of cellulose, and if you recall from chapter 2, cellulose is a carbohydrate. So the next question would be, how does water move into and out of the cell, or oxygen or carbon dioxide? So how do things move across that cell membrane? Well, this particular section is going to talk about the various ways, there's more than one, that things move across the cell membrane. Every living cell exists in a liquid environment that it needs to survive. The cell membrane regulates the movement of dissolved molecules from the liquid on one side of the membrane to the liquid on the other side of the membrane. The goal when we're moving things from one side to the other is to reach equilibrium. The cytoplasm, which you learned in the previous chapter of the cell, contains a solution of many different substances in water. It has all of the organelles that are in there too, the mitochondria, the endoplasmic reticulum, the Golgi apparatus, ribosomes, etc. The substances dissolved in a solution are called solutes, and you learned about this way back in chapter 2 also. The concentration of a solution is the mass of solute in a given volume of solution. And what we're going to be talking about in this section is how things move to reach equilibrium, because that's our goal. Our goal is to have equal things both on the inside and the outside. The first thing you're going to learn about is diffusion. Diffusion is when particles move from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. Now I'm going to back up the video so you can watch this again. You notice that the particles are very concentrated at the corner and then they spread out. So once again, diffusion is when particles move from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. Substances diffuse across membranes without requiring energy. So what this is saying is when something moves from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration, no energy is required. Absolutely no energy, because it's going with the concentration gradient. It's a normal transition from going from a high to a low. Think about you're at the top of a hill and you're going from the top of a hill down to the bottom of a hill. You can just go down the bottom to the bottom without any energy. So when you're going from high to low, once again, no energy is required. Diffusion is what's called a passive process. So diffusion is passive, which means no energy is used to make the molecules move. Once again, diffusion is passive and no energy is required to make these move. They have a natural kinetic energy, and kinetic means energy that moves. So if you look at the animation, they're moving from high to low. Oops. Diffusion of liquid. This you've seen before. If you drop food coloring into a beaker of water, it will just, if left over time, everything will diffuse, and eventually that clear water is going to be a specific color because it's going from, once again, an area of high concentration with that dye. It slowly spreads out into the water where eventually an equilibrium is going to be reached. So I'm going to say it again, and you're going to get tired of hearing me saying this. They move from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. They pass through the cell membrane. So once again, the solute, which are these particles in this particular example, move what's called down the concentration gradient. They move down from high to low, and you can see that in the above picture. So let's sum this up. Diffusion is, there is a high concentration of solute on one side of the membrane as compared to the other side. Solute particles move from the side of the membrane with a high concentration of solute to the side of the membrane with a low concentration of solute. One thing that you have to remember when we're talking about diffusion, we're talking about solute particles moving from high to low. The solute particles will continue to diffuse across the membrane until equilibrium is reached. So our goal is to have the same number on both sides.